I found my daughter sleeping on the concrete pavement outside a convenience store in the middle of a Chicago winter, clutching a restraining order signed by her own husband. He had sold their home out from under her and moved his mistress into a penthouse the same day, leaving Sarah with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply walked into his new luxury apartment building the next morning, and when he opened the door, I did not just ruin his day, I erased his entire existence. Before I tell you how I destroyed a man without lifting a finger, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you would never forgive a family member for? My name is Augustus King, and this is how I reminded the world that you never, ever touch what belongs to the king. My life at 72 was supposed to be quiet, deeply quiet. I live in a log cabin about 40 minutes outside of Chicago, nestled in a wooded area where the only noise comes from the businesses off. Wind howling through the old oaks, and the occasional deer stepping on dry leaves. To my neighbors, I am just Gus, the old man who drives a rusted 2005 Ford F-150, wears flannel shirts that have seen better days, and spends too much time fixing a porch that never seems to stay fixed. They see a retiree living on a pension, maybe a former factory foreman or a school janitor. And I like it that way. I worked very hard for 40 years to build that silence, to bury the noise of my past life in commercial real estate and shadow banking. The kind of work where a signature on a piece of paper could level a city block or bankrupt a dynasty. I walked away from the boardroom wars a decade ago, and I never looked back. Or so I thought. The illusion of my peace shattered at exactly 2:14 in the morning. The sound of the landline ringing in the dead of night is a sound no parent ever wants to hear. It cuts through the darkness like a siren. In my line of work, or my old line of work, a call at that hour meant a deal had collapsed or someone was dead. I fumbled for the receiver, my heart hammering, a rhythm I had not felt in years, not since I was closing $10 million deals with sharks who wanted my blood. "Hello?" I answered, my voice raspy from sleep. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and utterly terrifying. "Mr. King, this is Officer Miller from the Chicago Police Department. We have a woman here named Sarah Sterling. She claims to be your daughter." The cold that washed over me had nothing to do with the drafty cabin. It was a visceral freeze that started in my gut. Sarah, my little girl who taught kindergarten, who baked cookies for the neighbors, who had the softest heart of anyone I knew. Why was she at a police station at 2 in the morning? "Is she hurt?" I asked, sitting up, the old mattress springs groaning under my weight. "She is safe physically, sir." The officer hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "But she is in a state of distress. We found her sleeping under the awning of a 7-Eleven on North State Street. It is 5 degrees below zero out there, Mr. King. She is refusing to speak to anyone but you. Can you come get her?" I did not even change out of my pajama pants. I just threw my heavy canvas coat over them, shoved my feet into my boots, and grabbed the keys to the truck. The drive into the city was a blur of snow and rage. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The heater in the truck rattled, trying to fight off the Chicago freeze, but I could not feel the warmth. I could only think of Sarah. She was supposed to be in her beautiful suburban home, the one I had gifted her and Brad as a wedding present 10 years ago. She was supposed to be safe, warm, living the life I had ensured she would have. I had not seen her in 3 months. Brad kept making excuses, saying they were busy traveling or focusing on his career. I let it slide. I thought I was being a respectful father-in-law, giving them space, giving them privacy. Now I realized I had been giving a predator room to hunt. When I walked into the precinct, the smell hit me first. Stale coffee, floor wax, and human misery. It was a smell I knew well from my youth, before I bought my way out of the gutter. I scanned the room, and then I saw her. Huddled on a metal bench, wrapped in a gray police blanket, was a woman who looked like my daughter, but aged 20 years in a single night. Her hair, usually so neat, was matted and wet. Her eyes were red-rimmed and vacant, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. But what made my blood stop in my veins was the mark on her wrist. As she reached up to wipe her nose, the blanket slipped just an inch, revealing a dark purple bruise shaped exactly like a handprint. "Sarah," I said softly, trying to keep the thunder out of my voice. She looked up, and the moment she saw me, she shattered. It was not a cry, it was a wail, a sound of pure brokenness. She launched herself off the bench and buried her face in my chest, sobbing so hard her entire body shook. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling how thin she had gotten underneath the layers of oversized clothes. The police officer, Miller, approached me, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, she was carrying this. It was the only thing in her pockets." He handed me a piece of paper folded into a small square. I took it, my hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. I unfolded the document. It was a court order, a temporary restraining order. The petitioner was Brad Sterling. The respondent was Sarah Sterling. My son-in-law had filed a legal document claiming my daughter, his wife of 10 years, was a threat to his safety. It claimed she was unstable, erratic, and prone to violence. It barred her from coming within 500 feet of their marital home. The home I bought. The home I paid for in cash, so they would never have a mortgage hanging over their heads. I looked at the officer. "Does this look like a violent woman to you?" I asked, gesturing to the trembling figure in my home arms. The officer sighed. "Look, Mr. King, I just enforced the paper. The husband called it in, said she was banging on the door, screaming. He has the legal right to keep her off the premises until the court date." I looked at the address on the order. It was not the address of the house in the suburbs. It was an address downtown. The Meridian, one of the most expensive luxury apartment buildings in the city. Why was Brad living there? And why was Sarah sleeping on the street? I did not ask the officer. He would not know, and frankly, he did not care. This was just a domestic dispute to him, paperwork to be filed. But to me, this was a declaration of war. Brad Sterling, the man I had welcomed into my family, the man I had treated like a son, had not just kicked my daughter out. He had legally maneuvered to leave her homeless in the middle of winter. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, precise and calm. "Come on, Sarah," I said, guiding her toward the door. "We are going home. Not your home, my home." And God help him, because he has no idea what he just started. The drive back to the cabin was silent. Sarah stared out the window, watching the city lights fade into the darkness of the tree line. She was shivering, despite the heater being on full blast. When we got inside, I sat her down at the kitchen table. The same sturdy oak table where she used to do her homework while I reviewed contracts worth millions. She looked so small now, so defeated. I made her tea, putting extra sugar in it just the way she liked it when she was a little girl and had a bad day at school. She wrapped her hands around the mug, the warmth bringing a little color back to her cheeks, but her eyes remained dead. "Tell me," I said gently, sitting opposite her. "I need to know everything, Sarah. Not the version you tell the neighbors, not the version you tell yourself to make it okay. The truth." Sarah took a shaky breath, and when she spoke, her voice was like broken glass. "He sold it, Dad. He sold the house." My mind reeled. That house was in her name, too, or it was supposed to be. How I asked the refinance. She whispered, tears spilling over again. "About 2 years ago, Brad said we needed to refinance to get a better rate, to pull some equity out for his investments. He said he was going to make us rich. Dad, he brought home these papers, piles of them. He said I did not need to worry my pretty little head about the details, that it was just standard banking stuff. He was so sweet that week. Dad, he brought me flowers, he cooked dinner, he told me he was doing it all for our future." I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to punch the wall. I knew exactly what he had done. He had slipped a quitclaim deed into that stack of papers, a document that transfers ownership from one person to another, often used between spouses. Amidst 50 pages of loan applications and disclosures, he had tricked her into signing away her half of the property. It was a classic con, a move I had seen used by the filthiest sharks in the business. And my daughter, my sweet, trusting Sarah, fallen for it, simply because she loved him. "He has been gaslighting me for years." "Dad," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength from the anger. She wiped her eyes aggressively. "He told me I was crazy whenever I asked about money. He told me I was too stupid to understand his business. He is a stockbroker, Dad. He talks so fast, uses all these big words. Last month, I found a second phone in his jacket. Messages, thousands of them, to a woman named Monica. She is 28. She is an Instagram model, Dad. She posts pictures of herself on boats, holding champagne. And in the background of one of those pictures, I saw his watch. The watch you gave him for Christmas 3 years ago. When I confronted him, he did not even deny it. He laughed, Dad. He actually laughed. He told me I was boring. He told me I had aged poorly. He said Monica understands ambition, and I was just a weight around his ankles. Yesterday he came home and told me to pack a bag. He said the house closed 2 days ago. The new owners are moving in on Monday. He sold it for $1.2 million. Dad cash offer. He took every cent. He said since the house was legally in his name, thanks to that signature 2 years ago, the money is his. And then he handed me a suitcase and told me to get out. I refused. I screamed. I threw a vase at the wall. That is when he called the police. That is when he showed them the restraining order he had already prepared. He told them I was off my meds, that I was dangerous. The police escorted me off the property. Dad, my own home. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for an answer, for a solution that didn't exist in her world. He told me to go to you, she whispered. He said, go cry to your daddy. Maybe he can sell that piece of junk truck and buy you a tent. He said you were a washed-up old man who could not protect anyone anymore. He said I had no value left, just like you. I sat there in the dim light of the cabin, listening to the wind howl outside. But inside my head, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of a judge passing a sentence. It was the silence of a predator who has just spotted prey that is injured and unaware. Brad Sterling thought he was smart. He thought he was playing chess. He thought because he wore a $3,000 suit and knew how to manipulate a stock ticker that he understood power. He looked at me, and saw a man in flannel driving a 15-year-old truck. He saw a retiree who mowed his own lawn and fixed his own gutters. He saw weakness, because he did not understand that true power does not need to advertise. He did not know that the only reason I drove that truck was because I liked it. He did not know that the reason I lived in this cabin was because I was tired of mansions, not because I could not afford them. And he certainly did not know that the washed-up old man he had insulted sat on the board of 3 shadow banking firms and held the deed to more commercial debt than Brad could count in a lifetime. "Go to sleep, Sarah," I said, standing up. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "You are safe here. Nobody comes onto this property unless I allow it. Sleep as long as you need. Tomorrow I am going to run some errands." Sarah looked at me, worried. "Dad, please don't do anything crazy." "He has lawyers. He has money now. He is dangerous." "You are 72, Dad. Just let it go. We will figure it out." I kissed her forehead gently, tucking the blanket around her shoulders like she was 5 years old again. "I am not going to do anything crazy, sweetheart," I said, walking toward the door where my coat hung. "I am just going to go into the city. I have not visited the Meridian in a long time. I hear the view from the penthouses is quite spectacular." I walked out onto the porch, the cold air biting at my face. The snow had stopped, leaving the world white and silent. I looked toward the city glowing on the horizon, a beacon of corruption and greed. Brad Sterling had made 2 fatal mistakes. The first was hurting my daughter. The second was assuming that because I had put down my sword 10 years ago, I had forgotten how to use it. He wanted to play the big shot. He wanted to use the law as a weapon. He wanted to talk about value. Well, I was going to teach him a lesson in economics. A lesson about the true cost of things. I pulled my old flip phone out of my pocket. Not the smartphone Sarah insisted I get, but the satellite phone I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I had not called in a decade. It rang once. "Blackwood," I said. The voice on the other end was smooth, devoid of emotion, like gravel wrapped in silk. "Mr. King, it has been a long time. I assumed you were calling. I saw the police report regarding your daughter. What are your orders?" I looked at the moon hanging low and heavy in the sky. "Clear your schedule, Blackwood," I said. "I want a full forensic audit on Brad Sterling by noon. I want to know who he owes, where he banks, and who he is trying to impress. And, Blackwood, find out who owns the debt on the Meridian building. I have a feeling I might be in the market for some." Real estate. The line went dead. I snapped the phone shut and stared into the darkness. Brad Sterling had taken my daughter's home. He had taken her dignity. But tomorrow, he was going to find out that he had stolen from the wrong man. He thought he was climbing the ladder of success, but he did not realize he was just climbing the scaffold. And I was the hangman waiting at the top. The Meridian rose out of the Chicago skyline like a middle finger of glass and steel, piercing the gray winter clouds with an arrogance that made my stomach turn. It was the kind of building designed to make people feel small, to remind the working class that they were down there in the slush, while the masters of the universe floated above the clouds. I pulled my rusted 2005 Ford F-150 right up to the front entrance, parking it diagonally between a gleaming black Porsche and a silver Bentley. The contrast was violent, like a scar on a perfect face. The valet, a kid who looked like he measured his self-worth by the horsepower of the cars he parked, rushed over with a look of absolute disgust plastered on his face. "Sir, you cannot park here," he said, waving his hands as if shooing away a stray dog. "Deliveries are in the back alley. This is for residents and guests only." I ignored him, killing the engine. The truck gave a final loud shudder before falling silent, coughing a cloud of black smoke that drifted over the Porsche's pristine hood. I stepped out, my heavy work boots crunching onto the heated pavement that melted the snow instantly. I adjusted my faded Carhartt jacket, the one with the oil stain on the left pocket and the frayed cuffs, and walked toward the revolving brass doors. The valet was shouting something behind me about towing my truck, but I kept walking. My focus was singular. My eyes were locked on the lobby. Inside, the air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. The floors were marble, polished to a mirror shine that reflected my worn-out silhouette. The ceiling, vaulted 3 stories high, held a chandelier that probably cost more than the average American earns in a decade. I had not set foot in this building in 15 years, but I knew its bones. I knew the steel girders hidden behind the drywall were sourced from a company I bankrupted in the 90s. I knew the foundation had issues with water table seepage that were quietly paid off during construction. I knew these things because I was the silent partner who signed the bridge loan to get this place built when the banks got cold feet. But to the man standing behind the security podium, I was just a piece of trash that the wind had blown in. He was a big man, built like a vending machine, with a neck that disappeared into his uniform collar. His name tag read Ramirez. He stepped out from behind the marble desk, blocking my path to the elevators. His hand rested on his belt, not quite on his taser, but close enough to send a message. "Can I help you?" he asked, but it was not a question. It was a command to leave. He looked me up and down his eyes, lingering on my boots and the flannel shirt peeking out from my coat. The look was familiar. It was the look of a man who enjoys the tiny sliver of power he has been given over others. "I am here to see Brad Sterling," I said, my voice low and steady. "Penthouse 4B. Ramirez let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. "Sterling, huh? He does not see visitors, especially not visitors who look like they just crawled out of a dumpster. You got an appointment, Pop?" I did not blink. I did not fidget. I stood my ground, feeling the weight of the silence stretching between us. "Tell him his father-in-law is here," I said. Ramirez smirked, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "Look, old-timer, I do not care if you are the Pope. Mr. Sterling left strict instructions, no visitors, and definitely no solicitation. Now turn around and walk out before I have to drag you out. And at your age, I do not think your hips can handle the pavement." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, a familiar spark of the old violence I used to carry. But I stamped it down. This was not a brawl. It was a transaction. I looked around the lobby, noticing the cameras, the residents in their cashmere coats glancing at us with mild annoyance. They saw a security guard doing his job, keeping the riffraff out. They did not know they were looking at the man who could turn the lights off in this building with a single phone call. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. Ramirez tensed, taking a step forward. "Put that away," he barked. "You are trespassing now. Move." I ignored him, flipping the phone open and dialing a number from memory. It rang twice before a voice answered, breathless and anxious. "Mr. King, is that you? I haven't heard from you since the merger." I kept my eyes locked on Ramirez's face as I spoke. "Tony, I am standing in the lobby of the Meridian. Your refreshing new security guard, Mr. Ramirez, seems to be under the impression that my net worth is determined by my jacket. He is currently threatening to drag me out onto the street. I would appreciate it if you could clarify the situation for him before I have to make a call to the holding company and remind them why you are still the general manager here. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then a string of panicked cursing. Put him on the phone, Mr. King. Please put him on. Ramirez looked confused now. His smirk faltered slightly as he saw the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. He saw that I was not bluffing. He saw the posture of a man who was used to giving orders, not taking them. I held the phone out to him. It is for you, I said simply. Ramirez hesitated, then took the phone, bringing it slowly to his ear. Yeah, this is Ramirez, he said, his voice still trying to hold on to that bravado. I watched the color drain from his face. It started at his neck and washed up to his cheeks, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. He stood up straighter, his hand dropping from his belt entirely. Yes, sir. No, sir, I didn't know. He was just... I understand. Sir. Right away, sir. He handed the phone back to me with a hand that was trembling ever so slightly. He looked at me differently now. Fear had replaced the contempt. It was a look I had seen on 1,000 faces in 1,000 boardrooms. The look of a man who realizes he has just stepped on a landmine. Mr. Russo says you can go right up, Ramirez said, his voice tight. Mr. King. He even added the name like it was a shield. A desperate attempt to show respect he didn't feel a minute ago. He swiped his keycard over the sensor, and the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just took my phone back and slipped it into my pocket. Thank you, Ramirez, I said, stepping into the elevator. I suggest you have the valet leave my truck exactly where it is. As the doors closed, I saw him frantically speaking into his radio, probably warning the penthouse that a ghost was coming up. But it was too late. I was already inside the fortress, and I was bringing the storm with me. The elevator door slid open with a soft, almost musical chime, revealing a space that smelled of money and moral decay. The penthouse was not just an apartment. It was a statement. A sprawling, open-concept fortress of glass and white leather suspended 40 stories above the city. I stepped out of the elevator, my heavy boots sinking into a rug that probably cost more than my truck. And for a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago. The city lights twinkling like diamonds scattered on black velvet. It was breathtaking. It was magnificent. And it was the exact same view Sarah should have been looking at instead of the underside of a convenience store awning. The heat in the room was stifling, a dry, artificial warmth that contrasted violently with the bone-deep chill I still felt from the street below. Brad was standing by the wet bar, a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir in his hand. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that looked soft enough to melt, and designer jeans that were distressed by a machine, not by work. He looked the part of the master of the universe, the young wolf of Wall Street, basking in his conquest. When he turned and saw me, the smile dropped from his face like a stone. It was replaced instantly by a look of sheer annoyance, mixed with a flicker of confusion, as if he couldn't understand how a piece of his past life had managed to float up to this altitude. Monica was draped over a chaise lounge near the window, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, her eyes scanning me with the same bored indifference one might reserve for a waiter who brought the wrong order. She was beautiful, in a manufactured way, polished and plastic, and utterly devoid of soul. "How the hell did you get up here?" Brad barked, setting the wine bottle down on the marble counter with a heavy thud. His voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Security! Is there nobody doing their job in this building?" I stood my ground, hunching my shoulders slightly, letting my hand tremble by my sides. I needed him to see an old man. I needed him to see a father, broken by grief, not a shark circling the water. "I just wanted to talk, Brad," I said, my voice cracking intentionally. "I just want to talk about Sarah." Brad let out a sharp, cruel laugh. He walked around the bar, approaching me but stopping a safe distance away, wary of the dirt on my clothes. "You want to talk about Sarah?" he sneered. "What is there to talk about? She is out, Gus. She is gone." I moved on. "Or are you too senile to understand how divorce works?" I took a step forward, clutching my hat in my hands like a beggar pleading for a crust of bread. "She was sleeping on the street, Brad," I said, letting the desperation seep into every syllable. "She has nothing. You took the house, you took the money. She did not even have a coat warm enough for this weather. How could you do that to her? She was your wife for 10 years. Brad rolled his eyes, looking back at Monica as if to share a private joke about the pathetic creature standing in their living room. She signed the papers. "Gus, it is called a refinance with a quitclaim deed. Maybe in your day, business was done with handshakes and grunts. But in the real world, we use contracts." She signed it. She gave up her rights. It is legal. It is binding. And frankly, it is not my problem anymore. Monica giggled, a light tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper on glass. "Babe, tell him to leave," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "He smells like gasoline and wet dog." I swallowed my rage, forcing it down into the pit of my stomach where it burned like a coal. I looked at the art on the walls, abstract splashes of red and black that looked like violence. I looked at the furniture, pristine and white, untouched by the messiness of real life. And then I thought of Sarah, shivering on that bench, her wrist bruised, her spirit broken. I looked at Brad and I lowered my head, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "Please, Brad," I begged, my voice shaking. "I am not asking for everything. I know the law is on your side. I know you are a smart man, a successful man. But that house was a gift from me. It was my life savings. I worked 40 years for that money. Just give her a part of it. Just enough to get an apartment, to get back on her feet. You have all this." I gestured around the room with a trembling hand. "You have the penthouse, the view, the new life. You won, Brad. You won everything. Do you really need to crush her completely? Just give her 20%. That is all I ask. Please, for the sake of the time you were family." Brad walked right up to me then, close enough that I could smell the expensive cologne masking the scent of his greed. He looked down at me, a sneer curling his lip. He was enjoying this. He was feeding on my begging, feeling his own power grow with every plea I made. He saw a weak old man pleading for mercy, and it made him feel like a god. "You just do not get it, do you, old man?" he said, his voice low and venomous. "This is not about need. It is about winning. And Sarah? She is a loser." She was a weight around my neck, dragging me down to mediocrity. "Look at you. You are pathetic. begging for scraps in a house you could not afford to rent for a night. You think because you bought that little suburban box 10 years ago that you matter. You do not matter. You are a relic, a country bumpkin playing dress-up in the big city. He poked a finger into my chest hard. I felt the muscle tense beneath my coat, but I did not flinch. I let him do it. I let him think he could push me. You want money? Get a job. Or better yet, sell that piece of junk truck downstairs. But do not come into my home, my sanctuary, and beg for handouts. Sarah gets nothing because she deserves nothing. She was too stupid to read the papers, and you were too stupid to protect her. That is the way the world works, Gus. The wolves eat the sheep. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested for harassment. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a gnat, walking back toward Monica, who was now watching with a smirk playing on her lips. I stood there for a moment, watching them, watching the way he poured her another glass of wine, watching the way he adjusted his cuffs, watching the way he settled back into his life of stolen luxury. He thought the conversation was over. He thought he had crushed me. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. I looked at the horseur on the coffee table, the one labeled Skyline Project, and I memorized the font, the logo, the color of the folder. I etched every detail of this room into my mind because I wanted to remember exactly what it looked like before I burned it all to the ground. Brad reached into the pocket of his designer jeans and pulled out a money clip that glinted gold under the recessed lighting. It was thick, filled with the kind of cash that makes a soft thumping sound when you drop it on a table. He peeled off 2 $100 bills, his movements casual and dismissive, like he was tipping a bellhop for carrying a bag. Could have easily carried himself. He crumbled them into a ball, a tight little wad of green, and threw it. It hit my chest with a soft thud and fell to the pristine white rug, landing right between my muddy boots. "Here," Brad said, his voice dripping with a toxic mix of pity and contempt. "Buy yourself some heart medication, old man. Or maybe some gas for that scrap heap you drove here. Consider it a settlement, a severance package from the life you used to have. Don't spend it all in one place." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic 40 stories below. I looked down at the money. $200. It was an insult so profound it almost took my breath away. He had stolen a house worth over $1 million. He had stolen my daughter's future, her security, her happiness. And he was offering me $200 as compensation? It was the kind of gesture a king makes to a beggar, the kind of gesture that says, "You are beneath me. You are nothing. You are dirt." My first instinct, the instinct of the man I used to be, was to lunge across the distance between us and show him exactly how much strength was left in these old hands. I wanted to wipe that smirk off his face permanently. I wanted to make him eat those bills, one by one. But I stopped myself. I forced my muscles to relax. I forced my breathing to remain shallow and wheezy. I needed him to believe the lie. I needed him to see a broken old man desperate for scraps, because a broken old man is invisible. A broken old man is not a threat. I slowly bent down. My knees cracked loud and dry in the quiet room. I let out a small grunt of effort, acting out the part of the infirm senior struggling against gravity. As I lowered myself toward the floor, I kept my head down, hiding the cold calculation in my eyes. I reached for the bills, my hand trembling intentionally, my fingers brushing against the soft, expensive fibers of the rug. But as my hand closed around the money, my eyes darted to the side, scanning the coffee table that was now at eye level. It was a low, sleek table, made of glass and chrome, sitting just a few feet away. On top of it, amidst a clutter of wine glasses and car keys, was the folder I had noticed earlier, the Skyline Project. But now, from this vantage point, I could see more. I could see the papers spilling out of the side. I could see the red stamp on the cover sheet that read, Confidential Investment Memorandum, Series A, Funding Round Closing Imminent. And right next to it, a sticky note written in Brad's jagged handwriting asking, Angel investor needed, 2 million, gap, leverage everything. My mind snapped a picture, recording every detail. The logo was a stylized skyscraper rising out of a cloud. The contact address at the bottom was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, heavily suggesting this wasn't just a risky investment, it was a gray market venture, likely unregulated, likely desperate. And the note? Leverage everything. That was the key. Brad wasn't just investing his own money, he was leveraging. He was borrowing against assets he probably didn't even fully own yet. He was desperate. He was gambling. And he needed a whale to save him. I grabbed the money, clutching it in my fist like a lifeline. I stayed down there for a second longer than necessary, letting the humiliation wash over me, letting it fuel the fire in my gut. Monica laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound that reminded me of breaking glass. "Look at him," she said, taking a selfie with me in the background, scrambling on the floor. "It is kind of sad, isn't it? Like watching a stray dog eat trash." I slowly straightened up, groaning as I rose to my full height, clutching the $200 to my chest. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with feigned gratitude. "This helps. This really helps." Brad sneered, looking at me with absolute revulsion. "You are pathetic, Gus. You know that, right? You are an embarrassment." Sarah was always talking about how great her dad was, how strong he was. If she could see you now, groveling on my floor for pocket change, she would die of shame. He took a step toward me, his face hardening. "Now get out. I mean it. If you are not out of my apartment in 30 seconds, I am calling the cops. I will tell them you broke in. I will tell them you threatened us. And with the way you look and the way I look, who do you think they are going to believe? I will have you thrown in a cell so fast your head will spin. And at your age, I do not think you would survive a night in county lockup." I nodded, backing away toward the elevator, clutching my hat and the money to my chest. "I am going," I stammered. "I am going. I did not mean to cause trouble. I just thought—" "Save it," Brad interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Just go, and do not come back. If I see that truck within a mile of this building again, I will file a restraining order against you too. I will wipe you out, Gus. I have the money now. I have the power. You are nothing. You are a ghost. Now vanish." I stepped into the elevator, the door sliding shut and cutting off the sight of his arrogant face. The moment the metal doors sealed, I straightened my spine. The tremble in my hands vanished. The hunched shoulders squared. I looked at my reflection in the polished brass of the elevator walls. The old man was gone. In his place was Augustus King, the man who had eaten sharks like Brad Sterling for breakfast for 40 years. I looked at the crumpled bills in my hand and smoothed them out carefully, placing them in my wallet next to my black card. They were not money anymore. They were a receipt. A receipt for the lesson I was about to teach him. He thought he had bought my silence with $200. He thought he had bought his freedom. But all he had done was buy a ticket to his own funeral. I pulled out my phone before the elevator even hit the lobby. The signal was weak, but it was enough. I dialed Blackwood again. "Find out everything about the Skyline project," I said, my voice low and lethal. "It is an offshore venture. Capital Fund, Cayman Islands registration. They are looking for a Series A angel investor to close a $2 million gap. And Blackwood, find out who the lead broker is. I want to buy the debt. I want to be the one he has to pay." The elevator chimed as it reached the ground floor. I stepped out into the lobby, walking past Ramirez, who was still standing by his desk, looking pale and nervous. He watched me pass, his eyes wide, afraid to speak. I did not even look at him. I walked out the revolving doors into the biting cold of the Chicago night. My truck was still there, parked right where I left it, a rusty stain on the pristine driveway. The valet was nowhere to be seen. I climbed into the cab and threw the $200 onto the dashboard. It sat there, mocking me, a symbol of everything Brad thought I was. But as I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that shook the frame, I smiled. It was a cold smile, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Brad Sterling wanted to leverage everything he wanted to gamble on a Skyline he couldn't afford. While I was about to become the landlord, and eviction day was coming a lot sooner than he thought. The revolving doors swept me out into the Chicago night, and the moment the cold air hit my face, the trembling stopped. It did not fade gradually. It ceased instantly, like a switch had been flipped inside a machine. The hunched posture of the defeated father evaporated, leaving behind the rigid spine of a man who had survived 4 decades of corporate warfare. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, buttoning my coat, not with the fumbling fingers of a retiree, but with the steady hands of a surgeon preparing for an operation. The valet was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding in the warmth of the booth, hoping the eyesore of my truck would just disappear on its own. I walked to the driver's side of the Ford, my boots striking the pavement with a heavy, rhythmic thud that sounded like a gavel coming down. I did not look back at the tower of glass and steel looming above me. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening up there. Brad was pouring another glass of wine, laughing with Monica, telling her how he had vanquished the pathetic old man. He was celebrating his victory, unaware that he had just invited a wolf into his living room. I climbed into the cab of the truck, the familiar smell of diesel and old leather grounding me. I sat there for a second, gripping the steering wheel, not in anger, but in preparation. The time for emotion was over. Sarah was safe at the cabin, sleeping off the trauma. Now it was time for the business of retribution. I reached into the hidden compartment under the dashboard and pulled out the satellite phone. It was a heavy brick of a device, secure, untraceable, and the only line of communication I used when I needed things done that the law might frown upon. I dialed the number, my fingers moving over the keypad with muscle memory. It rang once, then a click. Blackwood speaking. The voice was dry, precise, and alert. It was late, but Blackwood never slept. Or if he did, he slept with one eye open, waiting for the command that would unleash him. "I just left the Meridian," I said, my voice devoid of the rasp I had used upstairs. The target is Brad Sterling, penthouse 4B. He is leveraged, Blackwood. He is desperate. I saw a prospectus on his table for something called the Skyline Project. Offshore Cayman registration. It reeks of a high-yield investment scam. Find it. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end. Understood, Mr. King. Do you want a standard background check? No, I said, staring at the glow of the dashboard lights. I want a forensic autopsy of his entire life. I want to know every cent he owes and to whom. I want to know where he banks, where he eats, and who handles his dry cleaning. If he has a parking ticket from 1999, I want to know about it. But most importantly, Blackwood, I want to know about his debt. Brad Sterling is not investing his own money. He is gambler playing with chips he borrowed from the house. Find out who holds his leash, because I intend to buy the collar. There was a pause on the line, a moment of silence where I could almost feel Blackwood smiling. A full audit. Initiate Phase 1. I will have a preliminary dossier on your encrypted server in 3 hours. Good, I said. And Blackwood, clear my schedule for Friday night. I have a feeling I am going to be attending a closing party. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the frame of the truck. I put it in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the luxury cars and the golden light of the lobby behind me. The old man was gone. Augustus King was back, and he had work to do. 3 hours later, I pulled the truck into the alleyway behind a nondescript industrial laundry facility on the south side of the city. The steam vents hissed into the freezing air, masking the sound of my arrival. This was not a glass tower with a doorman. This was the engine room. This was where the real work got done. The door was unmarked steel, thick enough to stop a bullet. I punched a code into the keypad and it buzzed open, revealing a staircase that descended into the earth. The basement office was a stark contrast to the grime above. It was a humidor of silence and power, lined with servers that hummed with the sound of information moving at the speed of light. Blackwood was sitting at a heavy mahogany desk, the only piece of furniture in the room that hinted at luxury. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, ageless and unsmiling. He did not stand up when I entered. He simply slid a thick black folder across the polished wood surface toward me. "It is worse than we thought, Mr. King," Blackwood said, his voice dry as parchment. "I have seen reckless behavior before, but your son-in-law has a death wish. He is not just leveraged. He is underwater, and the sharks are already circling." I took off my coat and sat down, opening the file. The first page was a summary of debts, and it was bleeding red ink. I scanned the numbers, my eyes narrowing. Brad Sterling, the man who sneered at my $200, the man who lived in a penthouse and drank vintage wine, was technically destitute. He had credit cards maxed out to limits that would make a normal man faint. But that was just the surface noise. The real horror was on page 3. "He has a gambling problem," Blackwood stated, tapping the page with a manicured finger. "And he is not betting on horses or football. He is betting on high-volatility currency swaps and underground poker games run by the Vespucci Syndicate. He is in the hole for $500,000 to them, and the note came due yesterday." I stared at the figure. $500,000. He owed $500,000 to people who did not send demand letters or call collections agencies. The Vespucci's sent men with baseball bats and bolt cutters. This explained the desperation, I said them that, had seen in his eyes the frantic need to project wealth. He was running a con game, trying to look successful enough to attract new investors just to pay off the vigorish on his gambling debts. He was terrified, and he should be. But where is the house money? I asked, my voice low. The house he stole from Sarah. He sold it for $1.2 million cash. That closed 2 days ago. He should have enough to pay off the Vespucci's and still have plenty left over. Where is it? Blackwood. Blackwood turned a page in the file, revealing a bank transfer record that made my stomach turn. He did not pay the debt, Mr. King. He doubled down. He took every single cent of the proceeds from the sale of your daughter's home. $1,200,000. And he wired it into an offshore account yesterday morning. He put it all into the Skyline project. I looked at the transfer receipt. The date stamp was just hours after he had kicked Sarah out onto the street. He had liquidated her safety, her memories, and her future, and thrown it all onto a roulette wheel. He had not sold the house to survive. He had sold it to gamble. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own genius, that he believed he could turn that $1.2 million into $10 million overnight and pay off the mob before they broke his legs. Tell me about Skyline, I said, looking at the logo I had seen on his coffee table. Is it real? Blackwood allowed himself a rare, cold smile. It is a ghost, Mr. King. It is a speculative cryptocurrency venture marketed as a decentralized metaverse real estate platform. It promises returns of 300% in the first quarter. It is a classic Ponzi structure, wrapped in buzzwords and glossy brochures. The servers are in Belize. The directors are shell companies. The entire thing is vaporware. Brad Sterling did not invest in a company. He threw his money into a bonfire. I sat back in the chair, feeling a cold fury settle in my chest. Brad was not just evil. He was stupid. And stupidity is much more dangerous than malice. He had taken my life's work, the security I built for my child, and traded it for magic beans. He was sitting in that penthouse right now, thinking he was a visionary, waiting for his ship to come in, unaware that the ship had already sunk. He is trying to bridge the gap, Blackwood continued. He burned the house money to buy his buy-in for the Series A round, but he is still short. The Skyline prospectus requires a minimum buy-in of $3 million to become a principal partner. He thinks if he becomes a partner, he can cash out before the crash. He is looking for an angel investor to give him the other $2 million. He is desperate, Mr. King. He has the mob breathing down his neck, and he has locked up his only liquidity in a scam he cannot exit. I looked at the document spread out before me, the map of a man's self-destruction. It was all there, the greed, the fear, the stupidity. He was trapped. He had the Vespucci's on one side, ready to collect blood if they didn't get cash, and he had the Skyline scam on the other, swallowing his capital. And in the middle was Brad, dancing on a wire, trying to look like a king while the rope frayed beneath his feet. So he needs $2 million to seal his fate, I murmured, tapping my chin. He needs a savior. He needs someone rich, someone gullible, someone who wants to buy into the dream. Blackwood nodded, watching me closely. He is actively soliciting. He has meetings set up with half the venture capital firms in the city, but they are laughing him out of the room. Due diligence kills him in 5 minutes. He needs a private investor, someone outside the system. I closed the file, the sound echoing in the quiet room. I stood up, walking over to the server racks, watching the lights blink. Brad Sterling wanted a private investor. He wanted a whale. Well, I knew a thing or two about being a whale. I knew how to swim in deep water, and I knew how to swallow smaller fish whole. I want to buy his debt, I said, turning back to Blackwood. Not the credit cards, the spoochy debt. Reach out to them tonight. Use the shell company, the Janus Group. Tell them we are acquiring distressed assets, and we are willing to pay 70 cents on the dollar for the sterling note. Cash, immediate transfer. They will take it. They would rather have liquid cash today than break legs tomorrow for money. Brad does not have. Blackwood typed a note into his secure tablet. Consider it done. By tomorrow morning, you will be the holder of his promissory note. You will own him. Not yet, I said, a dark plan forming in my mind. Owning the debt is just the leverage. I want to own the soul. I want him to believe he has won. I want him to think he has found the angel investor he has been praying for. I walked back to the desk and placed my hand on the file. The Skyline Project. It was a scam, yes, but scams needed money to keep the lights on. Scams needed fresh victims. And if I controlled the flow of money, I controlled the scam. Blackwood, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Find out who is running the front end of Skyline. Find out who the broker is. And then I want you to set up a meeting. Not for me, for a representative of a very wealthy, very private investment consortium based in Dubai. We are looking for high-risk, high-reward opportunities, and we hear Mr. Sterling is the man to talk to. Blackwood's eyes gleamed. He understood perfectly. We are going to give him the rope. No, I corrected him, putting on my coat. We are going to build the gallows. He is going to tie the knot himself. All we have to do is kick the chair out from under him. Get the Vespucci note, and then set up the meeting. I want Brad Sterling to think he is about to become the richest man in Chicago. I want him to taste it. And then I want to be the one to take it all away. I walked out of the office and back into the cold night. The wind had picked up, howling through the alleyway like a banshee. I climbed into my truck and sat there for a moment, breathing in the cold air. Brad Sterling had destroyed my daughter's life for a gamble. He had bet everything on a lie. Now I was going to make that lie his reality. I was going to be his savior. I was going to be his angel. And when he finally looked up to thank me, he was going to see the face of the man he left for dead, holding the invoice for his soul. I sat in the silence of that underground bunker, watching the digital clock on the wall tick over to the next minute. The hum of the servers was the only sound, a constant electric drone that felt like the heartbeat of the city's financial underworld. Blackwood sat opposite me, his fingers poised over the keyboard, waiting for the command that would turn a man's life into a commodity. I looked at the file one last time. The red ink of the debt screaming from the page. $500,000 owed to the Vespucci syndicate. It was a death sentence waiting to be executed unless someone intervened. And that someone was going to be me. Execute the buy, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the adrenaline that was coursing through my veins. Use the Janus Group holdings. Keep my name completely off the paperwork. I want the Vespuccis to think they are offloading a toxic asset to a corporate liquidator. Offer them $350,000 cash, immediate wire transfer. They know Brad doesn't have the money, They know breaking his legs won't print cash. They will take 70 cents on the dollar just to clear the books and avoid the heat. Blackwood nodded, his eyes locked on the screen. He typed rapidly, a series of keystrokes that sent a secure message to a contact who acted as the liaison for the syndicate. I watched the screen, waiting. The seconds stretched out agonizingly long. This was the part of the game I used to live for. The bluff, the offer, the turn. It was high-stakes poker, played with human lives instead of chips. 3 minutes later, a message popped up on the encrypted chat. Agreed. Wire instructions attached. Transfer within the hour, or the deal is void. I leaned back, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Do it," I said. "Send the wire." And Blackwood, make sure we get the physical promissory note. I want the paper. I want the wet signature. I want the actual document that says Brad Sterling belongs to us. Blackwood authorized the transfer. Millions of bytes of data crossing the city, moving $350,000 from a dormant shell account into the coffers of organized crime. It was done. In less time than it takes to order a pizza, I had become the owner of Brad Sterling's immediate future. The Vespucci's were out. The Janus Group was in. And the Janus Group was me. Now came the second part of the pincer movement. The trap that would appeal not to his fear, but to his greed. "We have the leverage," I said, standing up and pacing the small room. "Now we need the bait. Brad is drowning. He has thrown Sarah's inheritance into a hole, and he is praying for a miracle. We are going to give him one. We are going to be the answer to his prayers. Blackwood, I want you to create a persona." Blackwood looked up, his eyebrow raised. "A persona, Mr. King?" "Yes," I replied, stopping in front of the server racks, watching the lights blink. "I want you to reach out to him through the Skyline broker. You are representing the Al Majid Consortium, private equity out of Dubai. You are looking for high-risk, high-yield opportunities in the fintech and virtual real estate sector. You heard through the grapevine that there is an opening in the Skyline Series A round, and you were looking to deploy capital fast. $2 million minimum buy-in. But you need to vet the principal partner face-to-face." Blackwood's fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting the email, setting up the digital trail. It was a classic sting operation. Use greed to blind the mark. Brad Sterling was arrogant. He believed he was special. He believed he deserved to be rich. When he hears Dubai, when he hears private equity, he won't ask questions. He won't do due diligence. He will just see dollar signs. He will see a way out of the hole and a ticket to the day. Moon. Send the inquiry I ordered. Make it sound urgent. Tell him the consortium is in town for 48 hours only. Tell him they are flying out Saturday morning. If he wants the money, the meeting has to be Friday night. And Blackwood, tell him the senior partner insists on meeting in a private residence, not an office. He wants to see how the man lives. He wants to gauge the character of the partner. Blackwood hit send. The trap was baited. The hook was in the water. Now we just had to wait for the shark to smell the blood. I put on my coat, buttoning it up to my chin. "I'm going back to the cabin," I said. "Keep me updated. If he bites, call me immediately." I drove back to the woods in silence, the darkness of the highway wrapping around the truck like a blanket. My mind was racing, replaying the plan, looking for holes, looking for weaknesses. But it was solid. It relied on the one constant in Brad's character, his monumental ego. He would never suspect that the dirty old man he kicked out of his penthouse was the puppet master, pulling the strings of a Dubai investment firm. He would never suspect that the debt collectors he feared were now answering to his father-in-law. When I got back to the cabin, the sun was just starting to crest over the trees, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Sarah was asleep on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt, clutching a pillow like a lifeline. I stood there for a moment, watching her breathe. The bruise on her wrist was darkening, turning a sickly shade of yellow and black. It was a physical reminder of why I was doing this, why I had stepped back into the mud. I stoked the fire in the wood stove, adding a few logs until the flames roared to life, warming the room. Then I went out to the porch and sat in the rocking chair, my eyes fixed on the long driveway, waiting. The waiting is always the hardest part. In business, in war, in hunting, the wait is where the mind starts to play tricks on you. You start to second-guess yourself. You start to wonder if the prey is smarter than you gave them credit for. I spent that Thursday doing chores, trying to keep my hands busy. I fixed the loose step on the porch, hammering the nails in with a force that surprised me. I chopped wood, splitting the logs with a single clean strike of the axe. I checked the perimeter of the property, walking the fence line, my boots sinking into the snow. But my mind was in the city, inside that penthouse, waiting for a phone to ring. Sarah woke up around noon. She looked better, her eyes less haunted, but the sadness was still there, etched into the lines of her face. She came out to the porch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of coffee. "Dad?" she said softly, watching me sharpen the axe blade. "You seem different. You seem intense." I stopped the rhythmic scrape of the stone against the metal. "I am just focused, sweetheart," I said, testing the edge with my thumb. "I have some business to attend to tomorrow night. In the city." Sarah stiffened, fear flashing in her eyes. "You are not going back to him, are you, Dad? Please. He has that restraining order. He will call the police. He will hurt you." I looked at her, and for a moment I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her that I owned him. I wanted to tell her that by this time tomorrow he would be on his knees. But I couldn't. Not yet. She needed to see it happen. She needed to see the monster reduced to a man so she could stop being afraid of him. "I am just going to a meeting, Sarah," I said, wiping the blade with an oily rag. "Old friends catching up. Do not worry about me. Worry about getting strong. Worry about what color you want to paint the walls of your new life." She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded, trusting me the way she always had. The way she trusted me when she was a little girl, and I told her there were no monsters under the bed. I was going to prove that to her again. I was going to drag the monster out into the light and show her it was just a man in a cheap suit. The call came at 4:45 in the afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow. My satellite phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart rate spiking, checking the caller. ID. It was Blackwood. He took the bait. "Mr. King," Blackwood's voice was calm, almost bored. "The broker contacted me 5 minutes ago. Mr. Sterling is ecstatic. He says he is honored to host the Al-Majid representatives. He confirmed the penthouse for tomorrow night, 8 p.m. He says he has prepared a presentation that will blow us away. He is already counting the money." I let out a breath, watching a hawk circle the tree line hunting for a field mouse. He didn't ask for credentials. I asked. He didn't ask for a proof of funds. He did not ask for a single thing, Blackwood replied. "He is desperate, Mr. King. He is terrified the Skyline round will close without him, or the mob will come calling before he can cash out. He is blinded by the need for a lifeline. He swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. "Good," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Prepare the paperwork." Blackwood, I want the Skyline rejection letter drafted and ready, and bring the promissory note, the original, the one with the Vespucci stamp on the back. I want to slap it on his glass table loud enough to crack it. I will have everything ready. The team will meet you at the rendezvous point at 7:30. We will roll in together. I hung up the phone and looked out at the peaceful winter landscape. The silence of the woods felt different now. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath. The trap was set. The prey was moving toward it, unaware that every step he took was a step closer to his own destruction. I went back inside the cabin and walked to the closet in my bedroom. In the back, behind the flannel shirts and the old coats, there was a garment bag that hadn't been opened in 10 years. I unzipped it, revealing a charcoal gray bespoke suit, hand-stitched in Italy, silk lining perfectly tailored to my frame. It smelled of cedar and memories. Memories of boardrooms and hostile takeovers. Memories of the man I used to be. I ran my hand over the fabric, feeling the quality, the power woven into the threads. Brad Sterling thought clothes made the man. He thought his designer labels gave him status. Tomorrow night, I was going to show him the difference between fashion and style. The difference between a costume and a uniform. I was going to wear this suit like armor. And when I walked through that door, I wasn't going to be Sarah's dad or the old man from the woods. I was going to be the chairman. And the chairman was coming to close the account. I spent the rest of the evening sitting by the fire, visualizing every moment of the encounter. I saw the look on his face when I walked in. I heard the stammering excuses. I felt the weight of the debt crushing him. I rehearsed the words I would say, the exact tone of voice I would use. It had to be perfect. It had to be surgical. There could be no room for pity, no room for hesitation. This wasn't just about money. It was about justice. It was about balancing the scales of the universe for my daughter. As the fire burned down to embers, I realized something. I wasn't doing this just for Sarah. I was doing it for myself. I was doing it because for 10 years I had pretended that the wolf inside me was dead. I had pretended that I was just a gentle old grandfather who liked to fish. But the wolf wasn't dead. He was just sleeping. And Brad Sterling, in his arrogance and cruelty, had woken him up. Now the wolf was hungry, and tomorrow night he was going to eat. Friday night arrived, draped in the kind of electric anticipation that usually precedes a disaster. Brad Sterling was vibrating with it. He had spent the entire day turning the penthouse into a stage set for his triumph. He hired a catering company that charged $500 an hour to arrange trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked too geometric to be food. He rented art, oversized modern pieces that screamed new money to cover the few bare spots on the walls. He even hired a sommelier to decant wines he couldn't pronounce, just to prove he had the pedigree of a billionaire. It was a performance, a desperate peacock fanning its tail feathers, hoping to hide the fact that the bird underneath was starving. I knew all of this because Blackwood had tapped the building's security feed. We were watching him from the van, parked 2 blocks away, waiting for the green light. Watching him pace back and forth in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, rehearsing his pitch to an empty room. He was gesturing wildly, talking to the air, practicing the lies he was about to sell to the Al-Majid consortium. He looked manic. His eyes were wide and bright, fueled by adrenaline and the absolute certainty that he was about to pull off the con of the century. Monica was there too, draped in a silver dress that looked like it was made of liquid mercury. She was wandering around the apartment, touching things, taking selfies with the rented art, posing with the expensive wine bottles. They were talking about the future, painting a picture of a life they hadn't earned, a life built on the ashes of my daughter's happiness. I could hear them through the audio bug Blackwood had planted, a high-fidelity microphone that picked up every whisper of their greed. "We are going to need a boat," Monica said, swirling her glass. "Brad, seriously, when this check clears, we are getting a yacht. Not a little one, a real one, like the one the Kardashians rented in Italy. I want to spend the summer on the Amalfi Coast. I am so sick of Chicago winters." Brad laughed, a sound of pure arrogance swirling the ice in his scotch. "We are getting more than a boat, babe. We are getting a fleet. I am looking at a Gulfstream jet, a G650. No more TSA lines, no more flying commercial with the peasants. Once Skyline launches and the token value triples, we are cashing out. I am going to buy a villa in Saint-Tropez. We will be neighbors with Bono. We will be untouchable." He walked over to the window, looking down at the chapter city he thought he owned. "I can feel it, Monica," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is it. This is the moment everything changes. No more hustling for scraps. No more worrying about debts. I am going to be a king. And everyone who doubted me, everyone who looked down on me is going to have to kiss the ring." He paused, and a dark smile spread across my face. "Speaking of people who need to learn their place," he pulled his phone out of his pocket. I watched on the monitor as he dialed a number. I didn't need to guess who he was calling. My own phone buzzed in my pocket. Sarah was calling me, probably in tears, but I didn't answer. I needed to hear this. I needed to hear the full extent of his cruelty, so that when I walked through that door, I would not have a single ounce of mercy left in my soul. I listened through the surveillance audio as Sarah picked up on his end. "Hello?" Sarah's voice was small, trembling. She was likely back at the cabin, huddled under a blanket, terrified that he was calling to scream at her again, Sarah Brad said, his voice smooth and condescending, like he was talking to a slow child. "I just wanted to call and say goodbye." "Goodbye?" Sarah asked, confusion clouding her fear. "Are you leaving?" "In a way," Brad chuckled, looking at his reflection in the glass. "I am ascending, Sarah. Tonight I am closing a deal that is going to put me in a tax bracket you cannot even count to. I am about to become a very, very rich man. And I just wanted to call you one last time to remind you that you will never see a dime of it." I gripped the edge of the console in the surveillance van, my knuckles turning white. "You see, Sarah," he continued, pacing the room like a caged tiger, "you were always holding me back. You and your simple little life, and your dad with his old truck. You were anchors. I needed to cut the rope to fly. And boy, am I flying tonight. I sold the house. I took the money and I turned it into an empire. And you were probably sleeping on your dad's lumpy couch, wondering where it all went." "Wrong, Brad, please." Sarah sobbed. "Why are you doing this? Why do you hate me?" "I do not hate you, Sarah," Brad said, his voice turning cold and bored. "I just do not care about you. You are nothing. You are a footnote in my biography, the sad little wife I had before I became a legend. I just wanted to make sure you knew that tonight, while I am popping bottles of Cristal with international investors, you are exactly where you belong. In the dirt with the rest of the trash. Do not call me. Do not text me. If you try to contact me after tonight, my lawyers will bury you so deep you will need a map to find the sunlight. Goodbye, Sarah. Enjoy the winter. He hung up and tossed the phone onto the couch, laughing as if he had just told the funniest joke in the world. Monica walked over and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him passionately. "You are so bad," she purred. "I love it." "I cleaned house," Brad said, grinning at her. "No more loose ends. Tonight, we start fresh. Tonight, we become royalty." I took off the headset and looked at Blackwood. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning. He had a daughter too. He knew. "Is it time, Mr. King?" Blackwood asked, his hand hovering over the door handle of the van. I looked at the image of Brad on the screen, straightening his tie, checking his teeth in the mirror, preparing to greet the men who were going to make him rich. He looked so happy, so confident, so completely unaware that the guillotine blade was already falling. "It is time," I said, standing up and buttoning my charcoal suit. "Let's go introduce ourselves. The investor has arrived." The clock on the wall struck 8, and right on cue, the doorbell rang. It was a soft, melodic chime, designed not to startle, but to announce arrival gently. But to Brad, it must have sounded like the starting gun of a race he was convinced he had already won. I watched him on the monitor one last time as he smoothed his hair, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door. His face arranged into a mask of professional charm. He was ready to meet the men from Dubai. He was ready to step into his future. I stood in the hallway, flanked by Blackwood and 4 men who looked like they were carved out of marble. These were not standard security guards. These were private contractors, ex-military men who moved with a terrifying, silent precision. They wore black suits that fit too well, and earpieces that hummed with secure chatter. I adjusted my own suit, the $10,000 charcoal masterpiece that felt like a second skin. The fabric was soft, but the man inside it was hard. I was no longer Gus, the old man in the truck. I was the chairman, and I was here to foreclose on a soul. The door swung open, and Brad stood there, a welcoming smile plastered on his face. "Ah, welcome, welcome. Please come in. I am Brad Sterling, and it is an honor to—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes, which had been scanning for turbans or robes, landed on me and froze. The smile faltered, then shattered completely, replaced by a look of confusion that rapidly soured into anger. He spat, his voice rising an octave. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you if you came back I would have you arrested. And who are these people? Is this some kind of joke? Did you hire actors to intimidate me?" He looked at Blackwood, then at the security team, his eyes darting around the hallway, searching for the men he was expecting. "Where are the investors? They are supposed to be here any minute. Get out of my way, old man, before I do something we will both regret." I did not say a word. I simply stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the penthouse. Blackwood followed, then the 4 guards, moving like a tide of darkness, flooding the bright white room. We walked past him, forcing him to step back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. "Hey!" Brad shouted, grabbing my arm. "You can't just walk in here. This is private property. Security, Where is the damn security? He reached for the intercom panel on the wall, jamming his thumb against the button. Ramirez, get up! Here now I have intruders. Call the police. Call everyone. I stopped in the middle of the living room, turning slowly to face him. He was frantic, pressing the button over and over again, his face turning red. Ramirez, answer me! But the intercom remained silent, dead air hissing back at him. Save your finger, Brad, I said, my voice calm, filling the room without shouting. Ramirez isn't coming. Ramirez works for the building management, and the building management works for me. Brad froze, his hand still on the button. What are you talking about? You are senile. Ramirez works for the Meridian. You are just some broke old man who lives in a shack. Get out of my house. I looked around the room, taking in the rented art, the expensive catering, the desperate attempt to look like something he wasn't. It is a nice apartment, Brad, I said, unbuttoning my jacket and sitting down on the white leather sofa, getting comfortable in the seat of power. Great view. Shame about the tenant, though. Who are you? Brad whispered, backing away toward the bar where Monica was standing, looking terrified. Get out of here. I am expecting very important people. The Al-Majid Consortium is coming here tonight. They are going to give me $2 million. If you ruin this for me, Gus, I swear to God, I will kill you. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the glass walls. The Al-Majid Consortium isn't coming, Brad. There is no Al-Majid Consortium. There never was. It was just a name on an email, a ghost created to haunt a greedy man. Brad shook his head, denial warring with the dawning horror in his eyes. No, I spoke to the broker. It is real. The money is real. I need that money. The broker works for me, I said. The email server is in my basement, and the only person who is here to close a deal tonight is me. I gestured to Blackwood, who stepped forward and placed a heavy leather briefcase on the glass coffee table. The sound of it hitting the surface was loud, final, like a coffin lid slamming shut. You wanted an angel investor, Brad. I continued crossing my legs, exposing the hand-stitched Italian leather of my shoes. You wanted someone to save you from the hole you dug. You wanted a whale. Well, here I am. I am the whale, and I am here to collect. Brad looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. He looked past the face he knew, past the father-in-law he despised, and he saw the suit. He saw the watch on my wrist, a Patek Philippe that cost more than his car. He saw the way the security team deferred to me. He saw the truth, and it terrified him. But you are poor, he stammered, his voice trembling. You drive a truck. You live in the woods. Sarah said you were retired. I am retired, I said, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his. But I did not retire because I ran out of money, Brad. I retired because I ran out of patience for people like you. I retired to find peace, but you took that away from me. You took my daughter's home. You took her happiness. And now I am coming out of retirement, just for you. I nodded to Blackwood. Open. Blackwood snapped the latches of the briefcase open. The sound was like 2 gunshots in the silent room. He lifted the lid, revealing not stacks of cash, but a single, thin file folder. He took it out and placed it on the table, right next to the Skyline prospectus. Sit down, Brad. I ordered my voice, dropping to a command that brooked no argument. The meeting has begun. And you are going to want to be sitting down for this part, because we have a lot of business to discuss. Starting with the $500,000 you owe to the Vespucci crime family. Brad sank into the Barcelona chair opposite me, his legs giving way as if the bones had suddenly turned to liquid. His eyes were wide, darting between me, the briefcase, and the stone-faced men guarding the door. The arrogance that had armored him just minutes ago was gone, stripped away layer by layer until only raw, naked fear remained. Monica stood frozen by the bar, her hand clutching a crystal flute of champagne so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked like a statue of panic, beautiful and brittle, waiting for the hammer to fall. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the armrests of the white leather sofa, and steepled my fingers. I looked around the room again, taking my time, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. "You have good taste in views, Brad," I said, my voice conversational, almost pleasant. "But you have terrible taste in landlords." Brad blinked, his mouth working silently for a moment before he found his voice. "Landlords? I rent from the Meridian Group. It's a corporation." "It is," I agreed, nodding slowly. "A holding company. Very efficient, very private. Do you know who holds the majority share in the Meridian Group?" Brad shook his head, a sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead, despite the climate-controlled air. "King Enterprises," I said. "My company. I built this tower, Brad. I signed the checks for the steel, the glass, the marble under your feet. I own the building. I own the management company. I own the security firm that employs Mr. Ramirez downstairs. You have been living in my house for 6 months, playing the big shot, and you never even bothered to look at the name on the bottom of your lease agreement." Brad paled, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting the walls to close in on him. That's impossible. Sarah said you were a nobody. She said you worked in a factory." "Sarah believes what I let her believe," I said, my voice hardening. "Because unlike you, she didn't need my money to love me. She thought I was poor, and she still treated me with respect. You thought I was poor, and you treated me like garbage. That is the difference between character and currency." I gestured to the Skyline prospectus lying on the table, its glossy cover reflecting the recessed lighting. "Speaking of currency," I continued, "let's talk about your investment. The Skyline Project, the future of virtual real estate, the ticket to the Billionaires Club." Brad sat up a little straighter, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his eyes. Yes, Skyline. It's going to be huge, Gus. Mr. King. The returns are guaranteed. I put everything into it. Once the Series A closes, I'll have millions. I can pay you back. I can buy the house back. I swear." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You really don't see it, do you?" I asked softly. "You think you're a player, but you're just the mark." "What do you mean?" Brad whispered, the hope beginning to curdle into dread. "Open the folder, Blackwood," I commanded. Blackwood reached into the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a document on King Enterprises' letterhead, stamped with a red seal. He slid it across the glass table until it rested directly in front of Brad. "The Skyline Project," I said, watching his face closely, "is a proprietary financial instrument created by a subsidiary of King Enterprises. It was designed as a liquidity trap for high-risk, unregulated capital. It's a honeypot, Brad. A black hole for dirty money and foolish gamblers." Brad stared at the document, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled against the glass. You created Skyline?" "I created the shell," I corrected him. I created the website, the brochures, the buzz. I set the trap. But you walked into it all on your own. You were so eager to get rich quick, so desperate to cover your gambling debts, that you didn't do a single second of due diligence. You wired $1.2 million, my daughter's money, into an account controlled by me. "No," Brad gasped. "No, that's illegal. That's fraud." "It's unregulated crypto speculation," I said coldly. "Read the fine print on the contract you signed. Section 4, paragraph B. All initial buy-in capital is subject to a mandatory lockup period of 5 years, during which time funds are non-refundable and non-transferable." You signed it, Brad. You gave me your money, and you agreed to let me keep it. But that money was for the Vespucci's," Brad stammered, tears welling up in his eyes. "If I don't pay them, they'll kill me. You have to give it back. Please, it's Sarah's money." "It was Sarah's money," I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. "Until you stole it. Until you gambled it. Now, it's my money, and it's frozen. That $1.2 million is sitting in a secure escrow account, and you will never touch a cent of it. It's gone, Brad. Vaporized. Just like your future." Brad slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. A low, keening sound escaped his throat, the sound of a man watching his life disintegrate. Monica let out a small whimper, backing away until she hit the wall. "But we're not done yet," I said, my voice relentless. "Because while you were busy throwing away my daughter's inheritance, you forgot about your other problem. The problem that doesn't care about contracts or lockup periods. The problem that breaks kneecaps." I nodded to Blackwood again. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out the second document. It was a thick, heavy piece of paper, creased and stained, with a signature scrawled in black ink at the bottom. The promissory note. "The Vespucci Syndicate," I said, savoring the name. $500,000. Due yesterday. You didn't pay it. You thought you could stall them with the Skyline money, but now you know that money is gone. So, where does that leave you?" Brad looked up, his face gray, his eyes hollow. "I'm dead," he whispered. "They're going to kill me." "They were going to kill you," I corrected him. "But they sold the debt. They decided they'd rather have cash today than a corpse tomorrow. So they sold the note to a distressed asset firm called the Janus Group." Brad frowned, confusion warring with his terror. "The Janus Group? Who are they?" "Look at the signature on the transfer order," I said, pointing to the bottom of the document. Brad leaned forward, squinting through his tears. He read the name, and then he froze. His eyes shot to mine, wide with disbelief. "You?" he choked out. "You bought the debt?" "I own you, Brad," I said, leaning forward until my face was inches from his. "I own your apartment building. I own the company you invested in. And as of 3 hours ago, I own the $500,000 you borrowed from the mob. I am your landlord, your banker, and your executioner. And right now, your loan is in default." I sat back, watching the realization crash over him like a tidal wave. He wasn't just broke. He wasn't just in trouble. He was property. My property. And I was about to collect. "Now," I said, checking my watch, "according to the terms of this note, the penalty for default is immediate asset seizure. Everything you have, everything you think you own, is now collateral. The watch on your wrist, the car in the garage, the clothes on your back. It's all mine." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. Blackwood, call the movers. I want this apartment cleared out by midnight. And call the valet. Tell him to bring the Bentley around. I think I'll take it as a down payment. Brad scrambled to his feet, grabbing my arm. Wait! Gus, please! You can't do this! I'm family! I'm Sarah's husband! I looked at his hand on my sleeve, then up at his face. You stopped being family the moment you put my daughter on the street, I said, my voice ice cold. Now take your hand off me before I add assault to your list of debts. He recoiled as if burned, stumbling back. What are you going to do to me? He whimpered. I smiled, a predator looking at a trapped meal. I'm going to offer you a choice, Brad, a very simple choice. You can go to prison for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. My lawyers have enough evidence to put you away for 20 years. Or, I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Or what? Brad asked, breathless. Or you can work it off, I said. You owe me $1.7 million plus interest. And I have a lot of dirty jobs that need doing. Starting right now. Brad sat there, mouth agape, looking like a man who had just watched his parachute fail to open mid-jump. The silence in the penthouse was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the smell of ruin. He was still processing the loss of the Skyline money, the realization that his grand investment was nothing more than a digital mirage created by the very man he had spit on. But I was not done. The Skyline trap took his future, but what I was about to show him would take his present. I nodded to Blackwood again, my attorney, the man who could strip a carcass clean with a fountain pen. Reached into the briefcase one last time. He did not pull out a crisp, clean document like the Skyline prospectus. This time, he withdrew a piece of paper that looked like it had lived a hard life. It was thick, yellowed at the edges, and it carried a faint chemical smell of cheap cologne and stale cigar smoke, the unmistakable scent of the back rooms where the Vespucci syndicate did business. Blackwood placed it gently on the glass table, smoothing it out with a reverence usually reserved for religious texts. Do you recognize this, Brad? I asked, my voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Brad leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He squinted at the paper, and then he flinched, physically recoiling as if the document had bitten him. He knew exactly what it was. He had signed it in a basement below a butcher shop, sweating through his shirt, while men with no necks watched him scribble away his life. That is the promissory note, I whispered, leaning in close. The $500,000 you borrowed to play big shot. The money you lost on currency swaps and underground poker tables. The debt that was due yesterday. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. I am going to pay it, he stammered, his voice a thin reed of panic. I just need time. The Skyline returns will cover it. I just need a bridge loan. I can get the money, Gus. You have to believe me. The Vespuccis, they are reasonable. Businessmen. I laughed, a sharp barking sound that made Monica jump. The Vespuccis are not businessmen, Brad. They are butchers. And they were done being reasonable. They were getting ready to send a collection team to break your legs and maybe a few fingers for interest. But they are also capitalists. They understand liquidity. So when a shell company called Janus Group offered to buy your bad debt for cash on the barrelhead, they took the deal. They sold you, Brad. They sold your debt, your risk, and your body to me. I tapped the paper with my index finger, hard. Janus Group is a wholly owned subsidiary of King Enterprises. I bought the note, Brad. I bought it this morning for $350,000 cash. It was a steal considering how much pleasure I am going to get out of collecting it. Brad looked from me to the paper, then back to me, terror dawning in his eyes. You own the debt? I own the debt, I confirmed. And unlike the Vespucci's, who might have given you a few more days if you cried loud enough, I am a stickler for the fine print. Blackwood read him Clause 14. Blackwood adjusted his glasses and picked up the document, reading in a monotone voice that made the words sound even more terrifying. In the event of default, which occurs 24 hours past the due date, the holder of this note reserves the right to trigger the immediate asset seizure and liquidation clause. The borrower agrees to forfeit all personal and real property, current and future, until the principal, plus an interest rate of 25% compounded daily, is repaid in full. This includes, but is not limited to, vehicles, jewelry, electronics, real estate, cash reserves, and personal effects. Blackwood set the paper down. The room went dead silent. Brad stared at me, his face draining of blood until he looked like a wax figure. Immediate asset seizure, he whispered. Immediate. I repeated, standing up and buttoning my jacket. That means right now. That means tonight. That means you do not own the shirt on your back, Brad. It means you do not own that watch I gave you. It means you do not own the car in the garage. It means you are not just broke. You are negative. You are a walking deficit. Brad scrambled backward, his hands grasping at the air as if trying to hold on to the ghosts of his possessions. No, you can't do that. This is my home. These are my things. You can't just take them. I didn't answer him. Instead, I pulled a small burner phone from my pocket and dialed a number. Bring the crew up, I said into the receiver. A moment later, the service elevator doors at the back of the penthouse slid open. Two men in gray jumpsuits walked in, pushing large industrial rolling bins. They didn't say a word. They didn't look at Brad or Monica. They just started working systematically, clearing the shelves. "Hey!" Brad shouted, standing up but quickly sitting back down when one of my security guards took a step forward. "What are you doing? Stop them." "They are liquidating your assets," I said, checking my Patek Philippe. "Every vase, every painting, every bottle of wine. It all goes toward the principal. And Brad, give me the watch." Brad clutched his wrist, covering the Rolex Submariner I had given him as a wedding gift. The watch Sarah had picked out with so much love. "No," he whimpered like a child. "Not the watch. It was a gift." "It was a gift to my son-in-law," I said, my voice ice cold. "My son-in-law died the moment you put my daughter on the street. You are just a debtor now. Hand it over, or I will have the boys remove it, and they are not known for being gentle." Trembling, Brad undid the clasp and handed the heavy gold timepiece to Blackwood, who dropped it into an evidence bag without a second glance. "Now the keys," I said, holding out my hand. "The Bentley." Brad shook his head, tears streaming down his face, openly now. "I need the car, Gus. How am I supposed to work? How am I supposed to leave?" "You are not leaving," I said, snatching the keys he fished out of his pocket. "You do not need a car where you are going. And as for work, you are going to be working right here." I walked over to the window, looking down at the street, where a tow truck with King Enterprises stenciled on the door was already backing up to the silver Bentley. The hook descended, the chains rattled, and within seconds the car was hoisted into the air, dragged away like a dead beetle. Brad watched from the sofa, sobbing quietly. A broken man watching the last symbol of his fake status disappear into the night. "You took everything," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You took the investment money. You took the apartment. You took the car. I have nothing." I turned back to him, my silhouette framed by the city lights. "You were wrong, Brad," I said, walking closer until I was looming over him. "You still have something. You have a debt. $1.7 million to be exact. That is the combined total of the Skyline buy-in you forfeited, and the mob debt plus interest. And you are going to pay me back every single cent." Brad looked up at me, hope completely extinguished, replaced by the primal fear of a trapped animal. "I can't," he choked out. "I can't pay that. I will never be able to pay that, I know." I smiled, a predator showing his teeth. "That is why we are going to work out a payment plan. A very special payment plan, involving manual labor. Because the only thing you have left to offer the world, Brad, is the sweat off your back. And I intend to wring every drop of it out of you until the ledger is balanced." I signaled to Blackwood, who pulled one final document from the briefcase. It wasn't a contract. It was a job application. A custodial job application for the Meridian Building night shift. "Sign it," I ordered, pointing to the bottom line. "You start tonight. And Brad, do not worry about the commute. Your new accommodation is the utility closet in the basement. It is rent-free. Consider it a perk of the job." Brad stared at the paper, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the pen. He looked at me pleadingly one last time, searching for a shred of the man he used to call Dad, but he found only a wall of stone. He realized then, with terrifying clarity, that there was no way out. The house was gone, the money was gone, the car was gone, and the only thing remaining was the heavy, crushing weight of the consequences he had earned. He was not a millionaire. He was an indentured servant, and his master was standing right in front of him, holding the pen. Brad hit the floor with the heavy, wet thud of a sack of cement dropped from a height. There was no grace in his collapse, no dignity left to preserve. He crawled toward me on his hands and knees, moving across the white rug he had been so proud of just an hour ago, dragging himself toward my boots like a penitent seeking absolution. The sight was pathetic. A man in a $3,000 suit reducing himself to a toddler. But I felt no pity. I looked down at him and saw only the arrogance that had put my daughter on the street, now liquefied into terror. "Gus, please," he sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers, his fingers shaking violently. "I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. Just do not ruin me. I can fix this. I have contacts. I can get a loan. I can work this out. Just give me a week. Please, Dad, give me a week." I took a step back, moving my leg out of his reach as if he were contagious. "Do not call me Dad," I said, my voice low and vibrating with disgust. "You lost the right to use that word when you forged Sarah's signature. You lost it when you locked her out in the snow. You are not my son. You are a bad investment, Brad, and I am liquidating the asset." Brad buried his face in the carpet, his shoulders heaving. "Keep the car, keep the watch, take the furniture. It is all yours. Just let me go. I will leave Chicago. I will disappear. You will never see me again." "You are not going anywhere," I replied, cold as the winter wind rattling the windows. "You owe me a life, Brad. And since you cannot give me back the years Sarah wasted on you, you are going to pay me in the only currency you have left: your future." While Brad disintegrated on the floor, a movement by the door caught my eye. Monica, who had been pressed against the wall trying to make herself invisible, suddenly pushed herself away. Her face was a mask of self-preservation. The vacuous boredom was gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating look of a rat sensing the ship going down. She adjusted her silver dress, grabbed her clutch from the console table, and began to walk briskly toward the elevator, her heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm on the marble. "I am leaving," she announced, her voice shrill and tight. "This has nothing to do with me. This is between you and him. I am just a girlfriend. I did not sign anything. I did not sell anyone's house. I am out of here." She reached for the call button, but before her finger could touch it, one of my security guards stepped in front of the panel, blocking her path. She recoiled, looking at me with indignation. "Let me leave!" she screeched. "You cannot keep me here. That is kidnapping. I will scream. I will!" "Call the police." "Go ahead," I said calmly, crossing my arms. "Call them. Tell them you are trying to flee the scene of a massive fraud investigation. Tell them you are an accessory to embezzlement. But before you do, you might want to look at what Blackwood is holding." Monica froze, her eyes darting to Blackwood, who was standing by the glass table, holding the yellowed promissory note. "The Vespucci debt." "I do not know what that is," she spat. "I do not care. Brad owes you money, not me. I am breaking up with him. We are done." Blackwood adjusted his glasses and looked at her over the rim with the expression of a tax auditor finding a discrepancy. "Miss Monica Davis, is that your legal name?" "Yes," she snapped. "So what?" Blackwood flipped the document over to the signature page. "So this is your signature then? Right next to Mr. Sterling's under the section labeled Co-Borrower and Guarantor." Monica's face drained of color. She looked at Brad, who was still sobbing on the floor, then back at the paper. "What are you talking about?" I never signed a loan. I just signed some papers Brad gave me. He said it was for the insurance on the car. He said it was routine." Brad stopped crying abruptly, lifting his head. He looked at Monica, and for the first time I saw the truth of their relationship exposed. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was a transaction, and the transaction had just gone bad. "I needed a co-signer," Brad whispered, his voice hoarse. "My credit was shot. The Vespuccis wouldn't give me the cash without a second name." "You have good credit, Monica. You signed it." "You lied to me!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the penthouse. She threw her clutch at him, striking him on the shoulder. "You told me it was insurance. You told me you were rich. You used me." "I did not use you," Brad shouted back, scrambling to his knees, his fear turning into viciousness. "You wanted the boat. You wanted the trips. You spent $50,000 on clothes last month. Where did you think that money came from? You drained me. You are just as guilty as I am." I watched them tear each other apart, a smile touching the corner of my lips. It was beautiful in a dark, twisted way. The parasites were turning on each other, realizing there was no host left to feed on. "Enough," I commanded, silencing them both. The room fell quiet again, except for their heavy breathing. "Monica," I said, walking toward her, "you signed a document with joint and several liability. That means you are not just a girlfriend. You are a partner. You owe me $1.7 million, just like he does. You can try to leave, you can try to run, but my lawyers will freeze every asset you have before you reach the lobby. Your bank accounts, your car, your future earnings. It all belongs to me now. Monica slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, her silver dress pooling around her like spilled mercury. She looked at Brad with pure hatred. "I hate you," she hissed. "The feeling is mutual, I am sure," I said, checking my watch again. "But hate does not pay." The bills. And speaking of bills, the interest meter is running. According to the terms of the note, the default interest rate kicked in at midnight. That means for every hour you sit here arguing, for every hour you delay signing the work agreement, your debt increases by approximately $4,000. I looked at the two of them, broken and defeated on the floor of the penthouse they thought would be their palace. So I continued, my voice hard as flint. "We can keep chatting, or you can start working. Because right now, you are both costing me money. And I hate losing money, almost as much as I hate traitors." Blackwood stepped forward, holding out 2 clipboards with the custodial contracts attached. He offered a pen to Brad first, then to Monica. It wasn't an offer. It was an ultimatum. Sign the papers, or go to prison. Sign the papers, or spend the rest of your lives being hunted by debt collectors. Brad took the pen, his hand shaking so violently he could barely control it. He looked at the paper, then at me, seeing the stone wall of my resolve. He realized there was no negotiation. There was no way out. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his life away. Monica, weeping silently, did the same. I took the clipboards back and handed them to Blackwood. "Excellent," I said. "Now get up. The cleaning crew is waiting downstairs to give you your uniforms. You start on the ground floor bathrooms, and Brad, do not miss the grout. I will be checking." Brad sat hunched over the glass table, the pen trembling in his hand, hovering over the paper I had just placed in front of him. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, pleading for a mercy that simply did not exist in this room. The custodial contract was signed, but that was just the labor. That was just the body. I wanted the truth. I wanted the document that would scour his name from the record of decent society and restore my daughter's dignity completely. "Wait," I said, my hand shooting out to cover the paper before he could pull away. "We are not finished yet. The cleaning job pays the interest, Brad. It keeps the lights on in your utility closet. But it does not keep you out of federal prison." Brad froze, the pen slipping from his sweaty fingers. "Prison," he whispered. I thought if I worked, if I paid you back." "You defrauded a bank, Brad," I said, my voice low and level. "You committed wire fraud when you transferred that money offshore. You committed deed fraud when you tricked Sarah into signing that quitclaim. And you committed perjury when you filed that restraining order based on lies. My lawyers have drafted a criminal complaint. It is sitting on the district attorney's desk right now. All I have to do is make a phone call and they will come for you. And federal prison is not like the movies, Brad. It is loud. It is violent. And for a soft man like you, it is a death sentence." I watched the terror seize him. He knew I was right. He knew he wouldn't last a week inside. The arrogance, the designer suits, the smooth talk, none of it would protect him in a day. "Seller," I continued, sliding a second document across the table. "You can sign this." He looked down at the paper. It was a sworn affidavit, a full confession admitting to every single lie, every single theft, and every single act of manipulation against Sarah. It detailed how he had tricked her, how he had gaslighted her, and how he had stolen the proceeds from the house. It was a suicide note for his reputation. If he signed it, he could never work in finance again. He could never hold a position of trust. He would be a pariah. "If you sign this," I said, "the criminal complaint stays on the desk. I will keep it as insurance. You work for me, you pay off your debt, and you stay out of jail. But if you ever try to contact Sarah again, if you ever try to claim you were the victim, this document goes public. And then you go to prison. Do we have a deal?" Brad stared at the document, reading the words that branded him a thief and a liar. He looked at Monica, who was weeping silently against the wall, her own future dissolved into ash. He looked at the luxury apartment that was no longer his. He realized that his life as Brad Sterling, the successful broker, was over. The only thing left was Brad Sterling, the janitor. I can't," he choked out. "If I sign this, I am ruined. Everyone will know." "Everyone already knows what you are, Brad," I said coldly. "This just makes it official. Sign it, or I make the call right now." I pulled my phone out and dialed 3 digits. The screen lit up, casting a blue glow on my face. Brad watched the thumb hover over the call button. He hyperventilated, his chest heaving, panic overriding his vanity. He grabbed the pen, his knuckles white, gripping it like a dagger he wanted to plunge into his own heart. "I will sign," he gasped. "I will sign. Just don't call. Please don't call." He pressed the pen to the paper and scribbled his name. It was a messy, jagged signature, not the flourishing autograph he used to practice. It was the signature of a defeated man. He pushed the paper toward me, his head hanging low, defeat radiating off him in waves. I picked up the confession and checked it, ensuring it was legible, ensuring it was binding. Then I handed it to Blackwood, who tucked it away into the briefcase with the efficiency of an undertaker closing a casket. "Now the transfer," I said, pointing to the final page of the packet. This document was the asset surrender agreement. It legally transferred any and all remaining assets, including his 401k, his personal savings, and even the contents of his storage unit, directly to King Enterprises, as partial repayment of the debt. It stripped him of every safety net, every cushion, every last dime. Brad didn't even read it this time. He just signed. He signed away his past, he signed away his present, and he signed away his future. He was hollowed out, a shell of a man sitting in the wreckage of his own hubris. "Done," I said, my voice final. I signaled to the guards. "Take everything. The art, the furniture, the rugs. Leave nothing but the cleaning supplies." Brad watched as his life was dismantled, piece by piece, carried out the service elevator by men who looked at him with nothing but indifference. He sat on the floor, the cold marble seeping into his bones, realizing that the nightmare was not ending. It was just beginning. He had traded a cage of iron bars for a cage of debt and shame. And the man holding the key was the same man he had called a washed-up old fool just 2 days ago. "Get up, Brad," I ordered, standing over him like a colossus. "Your shift starts in 10 minutes. The toilets on the lobby level are filthy. And Brad, I expect them to shine." He stood up, his legs shaking, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his cashmere sweater. He looked at me one last time, not with anger, but with a profound, terrifying understanding. He finally knew who I was. He finally knew that there were monsters in this world that you do not poke, and that I was the biggest one of them all. "Yes, sir," he he whispered, his voice broken. "Yes, Mr. King." I turned my back on him, walking toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the emptying room. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew he would be there, scrubbing the floors of his own failure for a very long time. Blackwood reached into a duffel bag, brought up by the security team, and pulled out a bundle of gray polyester. It was a janitorial jumpsuit, the kind worn by invisible men in office buildings across America. The kind Brad used to look through as if they were made of glass. He tossed it at Brad. The fabric hit him in the chest, sliding down to rest on his lap, covering the fine Italian wool of his trousers. "Put it on," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. "You can keep the cashmere sweater underneath for now. It gets cold in the basement. But on the outside, you wear the gray. You wear the uniform of the man you really are." Brad picked up the jumpsuit, his fingers brushing the rough, cheap material. He looked at it with a mixture of confusion and revulsion, as if he were holding a dead animal. He did not move. He just sat there, paralyzed by the sheer drop in his social standing. "I do not have all night, Brad," I snapped. "Put it on." He stood up, shakily, stepping into the legs of the jumpsuit, pulling it up over his designer jeans and his soft sweater. He zipped it up, the sound of the zipper tearing through the silence like a scream. The gray fabric swallowed him, erasing the sharp lines of his expensive suit, erasing the silhouette of the successful broker. All that was left was a man in a work suit, looking small and defeated. "Now the tools," I said, pointing to the bucket Blackwood had placed by the door. Inside was a bottle of industrial cleaner, a rag, and a toilet brush with stiff blue bristles. "Pick it up." Brad walked over to the bucket, his movements jerky and robotic. He picked up the brush, holding it away from his body as if it were radioactive. "Follow me," I commanded. I led him down the hallway, past the empty spots where his rented art used to hang, past the bedroom where he had slept with his mistress, and into the master bathroom. It was a temple of narcissism, marble floors, gold-plated fixtures, and a toilet that probably cost more than my first car. "This was your throne, Brad," I said, standing in the doorway. "You sat here and thought you were a king. You thought you were better than everyone else. Well, now, you are going to serve the throne." I pointed to the bowl. "Clean it." Brad looked at me, his eyes wide with humiliation. "But it is clean," he whispered. "The maid came this morning." "It is not clean," I said, stepping closer. "It is filthy because you used it. Scrub it, Brad. Scrub it until I can see your reflection in the porcelain. Scrub away the arrogance. Scrub away the lies. Scrub until you understand that you are not above the dirt. You are in it." Brad hesitated for a second, his pride flickering one last time. But then he looked at my face and saw the abyss. He dropped to his knees. The knees of his gray jumpsuit hit the marble with a soft thud. He leaned over the bowl, the smell of bleach rising to meet him, and he began to scrub. The sound of the bristles scratching against the ceramic filled the room, a harsh, rhythmic grinding that sounded like justice. I watched him for a minute, watching the man who had thrown my daughter out into the snow, now kneeling in his own bathroom, cleaning up his own mess. He was crying again, silent tears that dripped into the water, mixing with the chemicals. But I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness, just the cold satisfaction of a debt being paid. "Do a good job, Brad," I said, turning to leave. If I find a single spot, you do it again. And tomorrow night, you start on the lobby. I walked out of the bathroom, leaving him there on his knees where he belonged. I walked through the empty penthouse and out the front door. The elevator ride down felt like an ascent. I was leaving the darkness behind me, returning to the world of the living. As I walked through the lobby, past a terrified Ramirez and out into the cold night air, I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like victory. It tasted like closure. The sun was shining when I pulled the truck up to the curb of the little yellow house on Elm Street. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a home, the kind with a porch swing and a garden waiting for spring. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, her eyes wide with confusion. She had spent the last 48 hours in a fog of grief, but today, the fog was lifting. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't a legal threat or a foreclosure notice. It was a deed. A warranty deed, free and clear, with only one name on the title. Sarah King. "This is yours," I said, placing the envelope in her hands. Sarah looked at me, shaking her head. "Dad, I can't. I don't have any money. I can't pay a mortgage." "There is no mortgage," I said softly. "I bought it cash. It is not a loan. It is not an investment. It is a fortress. No one can ever kick you out of here. No one can ever sell it out from under you. It belongs to you, Sarah. Just you." She opened the envelope, her fingers tracing the legal lines that defined her freedom. She broke down then. Not the hysterical sobbing of the night she was evicted, but the soft, healing tears of someone who realizes they are finally safe. We sat there for a long time, watching the sunlight hit the front door of her new life. I knew it would take time for her heart to heal. The bruises on her soul were deep, but she had a roof over her head. She had a father who would burn the world down for her, and she had a future that was entirely her own. We walked up the path together, her hand in mine, just like when she was little. The nightmare was over. The rebuilding had begun. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in my truck across the street from the Meridian. It was snowing again, a wet, heavy slush that turned the city gray. I wasn't there for business. I was there for closure. I watched the service entrance, the metal gate rattling in the wind. At exactly 2 a.m., the gate rolled up and a figure emerged pushing a heavy industrial trash cart. He was wearing a gray jumpsuit stained with grime and shivering against the biting cold. It was Brad. He looked older. He looked smaller. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, scrubbed away by weeks of cleaning other people's filth. He struggled with the heavy cart, his boots slipping in the slush, pushing the garbage of the rich toward the compactor. He stopped for a moment, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty glove, and looked up at the penthouse windows high above. The lights were on, golden and warm. Someone else was living his dream now. Someone else was drinking the wine and looking at the view. He was just the help, the invisible man in the gray suit, condemned to clean the toilets of the life he used to think he owned. I watched him for a minute, feeling the engine hum beneath me. I didn't feel hate anymore. Hate requires energy. Hate implies that he is an equal, worthy of the emotion. I just felt a cold, distant balance. He had sold my daughter's house to buy a ticket to the moon, but he forgot that gravity always wins. He had traded love for leverage and family for finance. He sold a home to buy a dream. I whispered to the empty cab, turning the heater up. And now he is paying with his life to buy back his nightmare. That is the only math that matters. I put the truck in gear and pulled away, leaving him there in the snow, pushing his cart into the darkness. I didn't look back. The rear-view mirror was empty. The road ahead was clear. I was going home to my cabin, to the silence, to the peace. And for the first time in a long time, the wolf inside me went back to sleep. Satisfied, full, and ready to rest. The debt was paid. The account was closed. I learned that silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is simply the sound of a weapon loading. Brad mistook my quiet life for vulnerability, and that was his fatal error. Family is not defined by blood or marriage certificates, but by loyalty and respect. When you trade those bonds for greed, you do not just lose a relationship, you lose yourself. There is no investment that pays higher dividends than integrity, and no debt is heavier than the one you owe to your own conscience. In the end, the only things you truly own are your name and your actions. Protect them. If you believe justice was served cold today, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments below, would you have made him scrub the toilets, or would you have sent him straight to prison? Let's talk.